Everybody, welcome to the video. We are back talking some MLB DFS for the 2022 season. We are kicking off opening day on Thursday, April 7th for a now 6-game slate. This was a 7-game slate. We did lose the Seattle-Minnesota game, and this could potentially become a 5-game slate as Washington and the New York Mets looks like they could have some weather issues as well. But if you are brand new here, my name is Chris Pennell. I break down the MLB DFS slate and the NASCAR slate each and every single day and weekend. You can also find me over on the Awesemo YouTube channel and on the website doing shows and articles if you do want some extra content from me. But if you do end up enjoying today's video in any way possible, all I ask in return is if you can just leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And feel free to leave a comment down below if you so choose to do so. You can tell me hi, tell me I suck, or just if you have a question, feel free to do it. I'll be more than happy to answer it. And don't forget about our sponsor of the show, Prize Picks. Use promo code CPEN to get that instant deposit match bonus up to $100, no strings attached. Use the link down below or head over to prizepicks.com. Use code CPEN and take advantage of that free money. But I'll stop boring you to death, so let's get right into today's slate. And as always, we will start with the pitchers, then move on to the stacks. And also, if you do want access to the spreadsheet that I am showing you today, it is available in the link down below over on the Patreon. You also get access to the projections, the optimizer, ownership projections, the Discord community, all that fun stuff. So if you do like the spreadsheet, you can get it for yourself, and it is updated throughout the day. So anyway, we will start up top. We have Darvish, $9,500 over on DraftKings. He is looking like the spend up because all the other spend ups are not going to be pitching. We originally had Jacob deGrom slotted as the ace on this slate, and then we had Max Scherzer. Well, he's not going to pitch either. So we are now left with Darvish. And if you guys remember last year's video, I usually had Darvish on here each and every single start. I'm not sure what it was. I just kept wanting to play Darvish, and sometimes it worked out, but a lot of times it really did not. Facing Arizona here, the matchup's fine. In Vegas doesn't hate him here either. Respectable implied team total against at 3.82. He's got a decent chance for the win here, 6.5K prop. I don't love that he's pitching in Arizona. A lot of these other pitchers are going to be pitching in cooler weather, which is beneficial to pitchers, which you'll see earlier in the season. That is definitely a big boost for them. So Darvish is not going to get that added benefit to him. But last year, it was fine. The ERA was above 4. The xFIP was below 4 at 3 3/4, though. This year, even better. Close to a 30% K rate. We know he obviously has plenty of K upside, which is what we are hunting on DFS, whether it be on DK or FanDuel. The big problem with Darvish was he was giving up quite a bit of power. The over a 200 ISO given up last year and over a 45% fly ball rate and 1.5 homers allowed per 9. So we are kind of spending a pretty penny for a guy that was a bit hit or miss last year. And his 2 most recent starts versus Arizona last season were in the negative. So we got to be a bit careful here, but last year versus the righties for Arizona, about a 25% K rate, only a 140 team ISO, well below 300, and only a 79 WRC plus. It's not like if this was a full-on slate with a ton of studs or I'd be all over Darvish, but since we have a limited amount of decent pitching options, which is kind of weird to say on opening day, I do think Darvish is certainly going to be in play. Dropping that to Max Fried here at $9,000 over on DK. And I'm not in love with it, but since he did get rid of quite a few good bats, and it's only a 3.58 implied team total against him, he's pitching at home. Pretty heavy favorite here, only a 5.5K prop over in Vegas. Fried's never a guy that I'm super excited to play, but he's a respectable enough pitcher. I just wish the strikeouts were a little bit higher. Only a 23.7% K rate last season, but a very respectable 3.45 xFIP. Sierra was a little bit higher than that, but I think he's a fine option if you want to get off the Darvish chalk. He should certainly be a little bit lower owned, and I'm not too afraid of that Cincy lineup. There's still some guys that can hit lefties well, like Tyler Stevenson. You have Jonathan India at the top of the board there, but I think Fried's a decent pivot off of Darvish in tournaments. Corbin Burnes, so he is only available really over on FanDuel at this point because he was on the early slate, but I did want to talk about him just a little bit in case you guys were playing over on FanDuel. But yeah, the early slate was, I believe, a 2-gamer with the Yankees and Red Sox, and they're no longer playing, so you can pretty much cross them off the list there if you were playing on DraftKings. But very expensive over on FanDuel, but he is certainly worth it. Absolutely crushed it last year. Facing the Cubs, I will say it looks like the wind is going to be blowing out in Wrigley, which is a big boost to the bats, but they got to hit the ball first, and they were a team that struck out a ton versus right-handed pitching last season. Let me scroll right over to their splits versus righties, but last season, over a 27% K rate and some overall pretty weak numbers. They did have a little bit of pop, but nothing I'm really too concerned about with a guy like Corbin Burnes. With the wind blowing out, yes, that may be a concern more so for a guy like Kyle Hendricks, who's not going to impose a bunch of swings and misses, but Corbin Burnes is certainly capable of doing just that. With this K rate being over 35%, barely walked any guys, a CR, XFIP, and ERA all in the twos, all elite numbers. I would just continue to ride the hot hand with Corbin Burnes, and especially if you are playing over on FanDuel, a pretty low 3.5 implied team total against him, and a 7.5 K prop. If the wind wasn't blowing out, I had to imagine that number would be a little bit lower, plus the beginning of the season, so never totally sure how deep these guys are going to go into the game, but I definitely still like Corbin Burnes. Shane Bieber should be a decently popular play over on DK. Just seems a bit underpriced here. Now, we were going to have a massive chalk pitcher in Robbie Ray. He was only $6,300, and he was the reigning AL Cy Young. So I didn't understand the pricing there. I thought the pricing on Shane Bieber was a little low. I know he was injured for the most part last season, only was able to get 96 innings in compared to these other guys well into the triple digits. But this is still Shane Bieber. He's healthy coming into the season. I wouldn't say the matchup versus KC is insanely soft, and they did call up Bobby Witt, which is definitely going to be a nice bat in that lineup. But it's still Shane Bieber. He's still priced fairly. There's a lack of really great pitching options on the DraftKings slate. So I could find myself dipping down to Shane Bieber quite often here. He actually might end up being my highest owned pitcher. I might just be being an Indians homer here, or Guardians homer, I should say. I'll have to get used to the new name here. But still, an implied team total below 4 for him. Over a 50% chance to win. 7.5 K prop over in Vegas. We know he's got elite strikeout stuff. Over 33% last season in limited time, and an XFIP below 3. So not too concerned about the matchup here versus KC. It's not super soft, but I think $8,300 is enough to get the job done, especially if you can pick up a win. Tyler Mahle, $7,700. He's a very risky option, but again, at this price point and the lack of options, really great options we have, because with Robbie Ray being out, that definitely opened up the pitching slate, because he was going to, more than likely, if you're playing cash games, he was probably going to approach 90% owned, and if you were in tournaments, he was probably going to approach 70-75% ownership. So he definitely opened up some things really for the entire pitching slate here. Mahle's somewhat interesting just because of his K rate. It's definitely a very tough matchup versus Atlanta. They did lose Freddie Freeman, and Ronald Acuna is on the shelf right now, but they did add Matt Olson, who's definitely a big lefty bopper, and we have an implied team total close to 5 here against him, and a very low chance for a win. Does have a 6K prop over in Vegas. We know the Braves will strike out a little bit, but man, I just have a hard time trusting Tyler Mahle. I mean, that walk rate's pretty high, close to 8.5%, but the Ks are good. 28% K rate, and the XFIP and CR both below 4 last season. He's probably a tournament option only for me. You got to be careful, but I do think the upside is certainly there. Adam Wainwright is a very boring option at $7,500, but he might be one of the more safer options on the slate. He's only got a 3.35 implied team total facing Pittsburgh, and last year versus Pittsburgh, I realized most pitchers had good games versus the Pirates, but he absolutely cruised versus them. Very good chance for a win here. The Ks are never going to be super high for Wainwright. He occasionally does have the good strikeout game, but 5K prop over in Vegas. He's pitching at home. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't get you that quality start over on FanDuel. The ERA was very good in the low 3s. XFIP and CR about a run higher, so he's certainly due for some regression. He obviously doesn't have a ton of juice on that fastball these days. Last year, clocking in on an average below 90 miles per hour and only a 21% K rate, but he's not going to walk a ton of guys. It's mainly just picking on Pittsburgh here. They might be better than some people think this season, but it's still one of the softer lineups you could go against, and just about all the pitchers we have on this slate. I mean, Wainwright's definitely got a very cakewalky matchup compared to some others. And then dropping down to the last pitcher here, you might notice I had a left-handed designation for Ohtani. I think it was picking up what he does on offense, but he's a right-handed pitcher, and he's only $7,000 over on DK. The problem is he is facing Houston, which is one of the worst matchups you could ask for. If Ohtani was facing almost any other team, I'm taking him all day at 7K. I still think he's going to be a pretty high-owned pitcher, and I think you can make a case for him in cash games, because I typically give elite level pitching the advantage over an offense because of how streaky offenses can be. We know all the variance in baseball, and I'd much rather trust a pitcher than I would an offense. But man, Houston is not a lineup I typically like to pick on. I know Ohtani's great. He still has an implied team total below 4, which I think is pretty high praise when you're facing the Houston offense. Still the favorite here, 7K prop over in Vegas, and he's got plenty of heat. 3.5 XFIP last season, close to a 30% K rate. The walks are a little bit up there, and he can allow some hard contact, but he does limit the power overall. Man, this matchup versus Houston, like I was saying, not too pretty. Versus Rockies last season, a 20% K rate, almost a double-digit walk rate, an ISO above 175, a 116 WRC plus, and a WOBA above 330. So definitely nothing easy about this spot for Shohei Ohtani, but the price point does make up for it. If he was around $9,000, I'm probably going to be out because I think there's plenty of downside, but at $7,000, You don't need too much. I just wish we still had Robbie Ray because he was such an easy plug-in at $6,300. You can easily fit in pretty much anybody else you want and pretty much build whatever lineup you want because the pricing is overall always going to be very soft to start the season. But it looks like Ohtani is going to be the new cheap darling on this slate compared to Robbie Ray, and there's plenty of risk here. I'm willing to take some shots at him at only $7,000, and I would imagine he's going to be one of the higher owned pitchers today. And starting us off with our stacks, we have the San Diego Padres facing off versus the veteran lefty Madison Bumgarner. And it's mainly just wanting to use some righties here versus Mad Bum. He has struggled versus them for a couple of seasons now. Looking at his splits versus righties last year, nearly a 200 ISO given up, a K rate below 20%, an xFIP above 5, over a 45% fly ball rate, and about 1.5 homers per 9 with a close to a 40% hard contact rate. And while this offense is a bit watered down right now with that Fernando Tatis, we can still use some of these righties. Manny Machado here at third base, he's going to be extremely popular on both sides. We know he's elite versus lefties. He's not even 5K. I think you're getting a decent price on him, and you're not really spending top dollar for pitchers on this slate. So you should be able to fit in pretty much any offense you want for the most part. Looking at last season, Machado, 179 ISO versus lefties. Trent Grisham, even though it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, still at a 191 ISO versus lefties. I'm not even, don't even be scared of these lefty-on-lefty matchups. You can still use them in stacks. And naturally, they're typically always a little bit lower owned, but at some point, they'll see a righty anyway. So I'll always throw the lefties on anyway, not being too concerned about it. Luke Voit got shipped from the New York Yankees. He's going to be in the 4 spot here. Batting cleanup most likely, $3,500 on TK. You could expect him to be quite popular, but all these guys do have a little bit of pop versus left-handed pitching. Will Myers, Eric Hosmer, again, lefty-on-lefty matchup, so shouldn't be as popular, but still fine option. Austin Nola, a cheap catching option's fine. Bottom of the order here does kind of fall off quite a bit, but they are decent value plays if you need them. But the Padres do look like they're going to be quite popular here. The implied team total, about 4.7. It's a decent park to hit in Arizona. I do think they'll be pretty chalky, but it does make sense, and they're definitely good cash game targets. Another stack I like quite a bit is the New York Mets here facing off versus lefty Patrick Corbin. Now you gotta be careful. The weather does look pretty grim for this game, so there's a decent chance it might not end up happening. But if it does play, I do like the Mets a lot here, and you can get off the chalky San Diego Padres, and Corbin's just the guy that you want to use right-handed bats against. Looking at his splits last season versus them, it wasn't pretty. I learned the hard way. I played him early on in the season when he was cheapish and just didn't really work out. But last year versus righties, and this is 131 innings pitched sample size, an ERA above 6.5, an xFIP above 4.5, a K rate below 20%, ISO of 260, a hard contact rate above 35%, and nearly 2.5 homers allowed per 9, and a WOBA close to 400. So all the righties are looking quite prime in this lineup. You can even use the lefties. Again, Brandon Nimmo. If you are stacking the Mets, don't just leave off Brandon Nimmo because it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup. He's still below 4K. He'll see a righty at some point. It's not like Patrick Corbin can't be hit by lefties or anything, so I like Nimmo quite a bit. Starling Marte, he's here from Oakland, $5,100. Pretty expensive, but this is a good-looking lineup, and a lot of these guys do profile quite well for me. There's no implied team total from the data source that I use yet, but I have seen some places have them close to 5, and it definitely makes him a pretty decent target. Francisco Lindor. Pete Alonso would be one of the top plays on the slate. I'd be very surprised if he's not one of the top home run threats. And if he does go deep, I mean, I think it's probably one of the more likely spots for a home run. So I love Pete Alonso batting cleanup here. JD Davis is a very dirt cheap option. He's only $2,600. We'll see if Robinson Cano cracks the lineup. It is a lefty on lefty spot, so I mean, I guess he could end up sitting. But if Davis is in the lineup, I mean, he's only $2,600. Not a guy with a ton of power or anything, but he did have a 305 WOBA versus lefties last season, but a very high 35% K rate. You know, Eduardo Escobar's got some pop. Mark Canha was a guy we would use over in Oakland for some decent pop. He's kind of pricey if he's going to hit this low in the order, but still think he's a fine option. Like, this whole lineup is playable versus Corbin here. So if the game does end up playing, I think the Mets are one of the better stacks on the slate. And moving on to our next stack, we have the Atlanta Braves. I know I talked about Tyler Mahle being a very interesting tournament option, but at the same time, I'm still going to have some Brave stacks because this team is still too good, even without Freddie Freeman and Ronald Acuna currently not in the lineup. But these guys pack a ton of power. We have an implied team total close to 5 here. Some pretty decent hitting conditions in Atlanta compared to most of the other parks. Supposed to be around the 60 degrees with some wind blowing out. So it's favorable hitting conditions. And these guys just have so much power versus right-handed pitching. Just looking top to bottom. Rosario, over a 200 ISO. Matt Olson, over a 220 ISO. Austin Riley, nearly 250. Ozuna, 136 ISO. And we know the year prior, he was just absolutely on fire. Always over a 200 ISO versus righties. Adam Duvall nearly a 300 ISO. Even the bottom of the order isn't looking too bad with Dickerson close to 200, Dansby Swanson close to 200, Travis d'Arnaud, he's just above 150. So this is a very powerful lineup, and we can definitely look to take advantage of this. Even if you just can't afford the expensive options, getting some of the cheaper guys like Eddie Rosario leading off, Marcell Ozuna, $4,300, Duvall, $45, Alex Dickerson, he's dirt cheap here, below 3K and almost free on FanDuel. So while Tyler Mahle has strikeout upside, he can also struggle at times, and the Braves are definitely a very scary lineup. So if he's not in his A game, I mean, you could look for these guys to do some massive damage. And the last team I want to talk about here is the St. Louis Cardinals taking on JT Brubaker at home. And while Brubaker wasn't a terrible pitcher, I know the ERA wasn't that pretty last year. It was sitting around 5. The xFIP was certainly a little bit better. So the ERA at 5.3, xFIP sitting right at 4 with a 24% K rate, but he was giving up power with over a 225 ISO given up and a 35% hard contact rate. So I definitely think we have some upside here with these Cardinals bats. Now, I wish they were facing a lefty. If you look at their splits versus lefties last year, you see a lot of number ones here in the rankings. They performed very well versus them last season. Versus righties, it certainly did drop off quite a bit. As you can see, we're in the lower half. But there's still some good bats in this lineup with plenty of pop. And again, we don't have like a ton of amazing stacks today. We have no Coors Field. We have complete dumpster fires on the mound, really, so we can't get too picky, but we do have a team total above 4.5 here for the Cardinals. You have Carlson leading off. Pretty expensive top half, but it certainly gets a lot cheaper. Edman's very expensive. We'll see him lead off sometimes, but if he's going to be batting in the 9 hole, it's kind of hard to justify in your $6,000 price point. But in the middle of the order here, in kind of the lower half, it does get a lot cheaper with Albert Pujols for $300 with the universal DH now. I mean, he can easily just slot into the lineup each day. Paul Young at $3,900, always has had righty on righty power. Yadier Molina, Harrison Bader. Overall, kind of an expensive lineup, and I wouldn't say it's an elite spot versus Brubaker, but they might go a little bit overlooked just because it's not as flashy of a lineup, and I wouldn't say it's the greatest spot in the slate. But if they're going to be a little bit lower owned, I definitely think that makes them a pretty solid tournament target. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So if you kind of help on any way possible, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. And if you do want access to all the extra tools that I do have, including the spreadsheet and a bunch of other things, make sure you hit the link down below and sign up if you want to. And it's the beginning of the month, so it's still one of the best times to do so. And I don't cover just baseball, I cover NASCAR each and every single weekend. But I think that'll be pretty much it. Check out Prize Picks if you haven't already. Use code CPEN. Go over there, make some parlays, have some fun with it. It's a very fun site to play on. Strikeouts, bases reached, and fantasy points and whatnot. So I think you'll have a good time over there. But I'll get out of here. Wish you all the best of luck on opening day, and I'll see you all in the next one.